Hey guys, Karalynn Cromeens. Welcome back to the Quit Getting Screwed podcast, where we talk about all the ways not to get screwed in the construction industry, whether that's from the homeowner side or the contractor side. And today with me, I have a very interesting guest who's got a very interesting company that we're going to learn all about and all the things that they do. Toner Kersting. Hey, Toner, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Karalynn. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. So you own a company called Toner Home Matters. That's
correct. Yes.
Okay. And so tell me what that company does, and then we'll back it up on how you got into that. So I know there's a lot to that company, but break it down as simply as possible.
Yeah. It's important that we explain it because there's not a lot of people who do what we do. That's the most common response we get. Had I known someone like you existed, that would have been excellent to know in the past. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's because there's no comparable. This is a new need in the marketplace. And I say I've been doing this for almost 15 years. This company, I've been in the industry for since the 90s. But we are a building performance company, and we specialize in residential structures. Now, of course, I've listened to all your podcasts, and I know that you have a in terms of construction type, a pretty broad spectrum. And I used to always get nervous about talking to professionals, attorneys, architects, engineers about residential homes. I'd go into a conference. I'm like, they don't want to know about houses. But you know what? Every one of those people, they all own houses. So it's like the common denominator. It's like the equivalent of everyone. Once you have kids, you all have this shared experience, right? So we are a residential building performance company, and we really do one of three things. We are either there at the beginning of a project doing what's called building performance design. So we're designing that structure, whether it be a new build, remodel, modification. I actually have a personal specialization in historic structures to make it perform properly in light of the construction, the climate, and the client. So because of that, we are experts in, and you're ready for it, you might want to speed this up. I'll do it fast for you. HVAC, insulation, windows, walls, sheathing, roofing, flooring, attic assembly, foundation assembly, building envelope, drainage plane, dissipation plane, indoor air standards, indoor health standards, indoor comfort standards, and microclimate standards, microgeneration standards, energy efficiency standards, just to name a few, but how they all come together as a system, as one. Because, we are in the worst place to own a house in the United States. This is horrible. I'm telling everyone that can hear us, leave Houston. This is not a place you want to stay. It's very, very challenging. We build really fast. So that's the first third of our business. The second third is building performance forensics, going to houses we like to say are misbehaving, warped wood floors, weeping walls, moisture issues, mold issues, comfort issues, deficiencies, resiliency issues, energy efficiency issues. Last year, we corrected 630 houses in Houston, and 91% of them have been built, remodeled, or modified in the last 5 years. So there's a correlation here that's starting to accumulate, right? And then the third part of our business, which is where you and I first met, is we do building performance litigation support. When things aren't really working out and you need to get professionals in there to help figure that out. And we love to say that we specialize in pre-litigation resolution, coming in and acting as a third party. I wish we could do more of that. That's not the nature of the beast. We do end up doing expert witness coordination, and that is taking that business, which has primarily been held by those who serve the commercial world, and customizing it for the residential approach. And it is totally different. We've been very successful with it, successful for our clients, and helping that resolution move forward. A lot of RCLA claims, but then a lot of things that sit in between that. We bridge into some product deficiencies, some construction liability, some contract liability, real estate. It's kind of all over the place. So those are the three things we do. We like to say we're part of every residential home. Do you want us now, later on, or at the end? Which stage?
Which one is most beneficial?
Well, I can tell you that everybody at the second or third stage says, had I known someone like you existed at the beginning, we would have done it. Isn't it wonderful when hindsight is actually the opposite of what they probably would have done at the beginning anyways? Because it costs money. And It's frustrating. It's not required. I am borderline required by code because we provide the required energy certification. But that's not going to make your house perform properly. So we still do. We're on track to design just over 700 houses in Houston alone this year. They tend to be, someone would say that they tend to be the upper end, the top 1% or 5% in the marketplace. And I disagree with that. I mean, we are doing work for some low income housing where the average house is less than $140,000. And then I'm working right now on a $28 million house. So it's really up to the willingness of the party to decide if they want their house to perform right or not. But I would say almost everyone to a fault, if there's a failure, they fully expected that house was going to perform the way they expected it, even without communicating that expectation clearly to begin with.
I agree. I think that's you don't expect to have issues when you build a house or buy a new house, right? That's the whole thing. So we kind of dove into what your business currently does. And so back me up a little bit. How did you get here?
Sure.
Tell me some background.
So I'm an investigative journalist by trade. Now, if anyone is familiar, in the 90s is so on trend right now, right? If you remember back in the 90s, if you were someone getting a degree in print journalism, I might as well have been getting a degree in blacksmithing, right? Because that was all changing. So out of school, was working for a couple different publications, did not pay very well at all. And I'd always worked on construction projects, building decks, things like that. So I liked it. So I went to work for a production home builder while I was writing on the side, doing freelance work. And I really fell in love with the construction industry and the residential construction industry. Then one of our houses flooded. And I remember a guy pulled up in a big fat Mercedes SL, and you're a 22-year-old kid. So you see that, you notice he's wearing like Cole Haan loafers and khakis, and I'm in muddy Red Wings and jeans. So the journalist in me is not afraid to ask anybody any questions. So I'm like, hey, what do you do? He goes, I do reconstruction. When houses have failures, we help it put back together. I'm like, that sounds interesting. So I took my first week of paid vacation and said, I'll work for you for free. If you don't like me, I'll go away. No harm. He ended up hiring me. I ended up buying that company 2 years later, growing that company, and selling it 5 years later. Came here to Houston and went to work for British Gas, designing service companies for them. They actually own the largest HVAC company in the United States. So I did special projects and ran many of the large offices for that. Really got heavy into the HVAC background, built installation companies, demand response companies, plumbing companies, electrical companies, all kinds of service companies. And that's really where I benefited. I was able to learn expert level criteria for all of these different trades. And most of the time, you're not afforded that opportunity. So I had a very unusual career path, but I also built this business for them with the anticipation of the energy code becoming a required credential on almost all structures around 2008, 2009.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot. It's interesting way to get construction from journalism, though.
That's right. It's and how many people have degrees that they use nothing with? But I actually do use this because in forensics, especially, it's coming in, identifying the key points of the story. What does it mean? And how does it impact the reader or the owner? And how do you convey that in a usable manner? That is journalism. That is forensics. So we're able to take some of that initial old school training and convey it to our owners.
Gotcha. So you mentioned something when you were talking about the work that you did last year, like all of the 650 plus homes that you touched were built or remodeled in the last 5 years. What is the significance of that?
So I actually teach a class called The Rise in Building Deficiencies Related to Climate Migration and Energy Code Pressurization Differences. Really exciting class, right? But there's a reason why. Yep. So houses that are remodeled, also houses that are modified. So like if you're changing all of your AC equipment or changing your windows or modifying your cladding outside, going from brick to stone or stucco or siding, adding on, all of that impacts how the house performs. Well, climate migration is really the biggest key here. We are hotter and wetter than we used to be, even 10, 15 years ago. And I like to tell people that on the design side, we're trying to strike a balance between indoor and outdoor climate. And just like in any mathematical or scientific equation, I can't have two variables. If I have two variables, it's conjecture at best. I need at least one standard. And the only standard that Mother Nature gives me is that she's going to get worse and worse and worse every year. So I have to strike that standard on the interior. So if you don't understand how the things that you're modifying your house on a remodel, or how you're building your house and how that's going to perform in contrast to the outside, it is very easy to push your house out of whack, to make it not perform properly. A great example of this is going to be wallpaper, right? Wallpaper's back in trend. Everyone wants wallpaper now.
Yes.
Wallpaper, we knew back in the 50s it was a horrible idea in the South, because all of our homes have a certain amount of water vapor that pass through them. Our structures are not built, unless you're using someone like me at the upfront and going through efforts. They do not have a vapor barrier between the inside and the outside. And hot, wet water vapor outside is attracted to the cold, dry interior. So it's going to pass through your walls. So if you install wallpaper, which is a class 2 or class 1 vapor barrier, it's plastic, it's vinyl. It's going to allow for that dissipation of water vapor to condense, and then you're going to have moisture issues. Well, we knew that in 1965. We forgot about it. We started doing wallpaper again in the 80s. We forgot about it, did in the 90s, forgot about it, and we're doing it again. So
has wallpaper not changed? Does it not become more breathable, or is it still the same thing that was in the 50s and 60s?
The funny thing is, it actually became less breathable because of the compounds, the adhesive. Okay. Because we're required to do low and zero VOC adhesives, that VOC is volatile organic compounds. They didn't remove the volatile organic compounds. They merely masked them in a separate chemical compound, which makes it more vapor restrictive. So in our effort to improve the indoor air quality, we've actually made it more susceptible to grow mold in that indoor air. So it's an oxymoron. I am on an island by myself screaming, because Houston, don't use wallpaper, please. Don't do that. And what's crazy is the issues that we're talking about here, they're Houston centric, but we're the point of the spear. So climate migration is moving up from the Gulf Coast forward. And I have calls now in, Blowing Rock, North Carolina, in Atlanta, in Oklahoma, and they're dealing with the issues that I resolved in Houston 15 years ago. Gotcha. So it is, it's going to follow that line. It's pretty crazy.
Gotcha. And when you say don't use wallpaper, we're just talking about exterior walls, right?
Well, yeah, on an exterior wall, a T-wall, or a lateral T-wall. There are actually very few true interior walls in a structure.
Gotcha.
So I would just say avoid it. Let's find other things that for design criteria, and hopefully that design trend will kind of move away.
Gotcha. So, and how does energy efficiency, do you work that into your part of it? How does that work? What does that look like?
We do. It's interesting because we started with energy efficiency being the leading factor in our design, and now it is a byproduct. We learned that if we chase energy efficiency, we don't have resilient structures. So basically, if I make a house that has a $40 utility bill, it has moisture problems. If I design for resiliency, the byproduct is an energy efficient home, which is difficult because the code wants us to follow energy efficiency. But that energy efficiency affects the resiliency, and resiliency is not part of the code. So it's an elective practice to design or modify or remodel a structure to not have issues.
Gotcha. What's your most challenging part of your business dealing? The front end or the back end? Just pick one. What's the most challenging?
Yeah, the back end, of course. As soon as we get to disputes, it is very challenging. One of the challenges I have is the litigation world and expert witnesses have primarily been populated by engineers. Okay. And what I do is not an engineering principle. So we have some confusion when there's a letter saying there's not a problem with this house, or this is what's going on in this house, and there's an engineering stamp on the bottom of it. It gives this idea that that has an engineering stamp. That must be right. But the letter and the content was not an engineering principle. So really the criteria or the education that engineer had, it doesn't even quantify what's the content of the letter, but the stamp gives it this air of importance. and it misleads both sides of the case. So we spend a lot of time coming in and using just 8th grade math and science. It's not that hard, but we look through that misnomer of the engineered letter, and we actually deliver everything in executive summary format. It's easy to understand. It's actually really easy, especially when it goes as far as arbitration or court. You know, a judge needs to be able to read this and understand in the first 5 paragraphs what's going on, right? You don't need to have some wackadoo degree from A&M, right? And that says, oh yeah, now I know why a wallpaper stopped. My mom knew wallpaper was a bad idea, right? She's not an engineer. She's a wonderful person, but she's not an engineer. So unless you count making empanadas engineering, then yes, she's a perfect engineer. So it's weird. We've had the wrong people telling us the wrong information in the wrong manner, which has led to a bunch of caseloads of just garbage decisions. And it's hard to go against precedent, right? Mm-hmm. And so I love when we have that most challenging period. Everyone's upset at each other, and you have a good, cognizant legal team that is actually out for the benefit of their customer, not just generating hours and hoping that this is a payday, right? Like going, hey, everyone, before we go crazy, do you want to just maybe talk to a third party shared and see what's going on and make a plan? Because in actuality, the average actual performance loss is less than $30,000 worth of repairs.
Really?
Right? And that might sound like a lot of people who are not living in the world that we live in.
Yeah, right. But, that's like a month of litigation, not even.
Right?
If you get me telling you to fix your problem for $30,000, I'd probably be like, go fix your problem.
That's right. Go fix the problem, right? And we've had plenty of clients who were on the other side of the case from us. They settled. It didn't work out in their favor, and then they still end up hiring us to fix the problem. We're like, we could have been here at the beginning. So I would say the most challenging point is managing it through the legal means. And I appreciate the RCLA process. And do you want to catch everyone? Have you already talked about that in your podcast, right?
Yeah. And so RCLA in Texas is called the Residential Limited Liability Act, but a lot of other states have incorporated something of the same nature, which what RCLA or this system does is gives the builder a chance to make an offer or make corrections before it goes to litigation. And I do think somebody in your position at that point in time can be very helpful if the parties are truly willing to work together, right?
Yeah.
So like in Texas, and there's several other states that do it the same way. The owner sends a letter to the builder, contractor, whatever, listing everything that's wrong. I always tell my clients to get that from an independent third party, somebody you're not going to hire, because that's kind of prejudice, right? They're going to say it's $10 bajillion when it's really not, or they're not going to be honest about the what really needs to be fixed because they want to get the job, right? So if we go to an independent third party, have them come look at everything, and then we attach that to the letter, here's all the things that need to be fixed. And you can builders can either run from it or just dive in and say, here's why I disagree, or take care of it. But the ultimate, and most of the times it's successful, the ultimate purpose of that is that most of these cases settle before they actually go to the courthouse or to arbitration, because that process is so expensive. Homeowners normally can't afford it. And contractors, don't want to go to litigation either.
They don't want to.
No, nobody wants to go to litigation. So normally, if we can get them with a good expert report to sit down and really talk about it, we can resolve it. But I think that's why somebody in your perspective is so important about, here's an independent third-party report of what's going on. And have you seen the two parties interact when you've got situations like that? What have you seen in your experience?
So I do benefit of having a spouse who's a psychologist, who's been able to look over my reports and see them over my shoulder. She's like, this is a horrible situation. Like, this should be able to manage through. And of course, I think one reason why a lot of people like me avoid residential is the emotion, right? This is not a B2B transaction. Yeah. It's not a lot of fun. So if a couple or an individual can get past the emotion of it and see what those numbers mean, it's almost always resolvable. It is when someone is so fractured internally that they need to hurt somebody and they have the funds to do it, knowing that they're probably going to ultimately lose anyways. You know, I mean, really, a settlement is where everyone loses.
Yeah.
So I can't get beyond that. And I think you do see a higher rate of that. I don't know. You could tell me. Do you think you see a higher rate in that in business owners or in homeowners? I imagine emotion could take over good decisions in almost all cases.
No, absolutely. And I have a higher retainer for homeowners for that reason, because it's got to, you know, and here's the thing is, I understand it from both sides, right? Your house is your most personal assets, where you raise your family, and some of the things that have, you know, mold intrusion, all this stuff, your family gets sick, that's personal, right? Mm-hmm. Your job as a parent is to protect your kid and keep bringing them home to a house that's mold infected and making them have seizures. I mean, how do you get over that?
I don't know. I have a house right now. Yeah, I've got a client right now. I'm standing in between the two of them. They installed the wrong kind of HVAC equipment, basically a sealed envelope with an open combustion furnace, and it killed their golden doodle from carbon monoxide poisoning. So there's a line item. There's a line item on the repairs of golden doodle, and it's like $1,600 for the puppy. Like we monetize that dog. That's the weirdest. I have not seen a monetized animal.
But they're lucky.
I can also make it.
It could have been a person.
It could have been a person, and we're fortunate that this was two working professionals in downtown Austin. They were never home except the golden doodle was, right? And carbon monoxide falls to the lowest level, and there's a 4-story townhouse, and they used to keep their dog on the first floor while they were at work. So the dog was basically swimming in carbon monoxide all day long, and they didn't know it. Yeah. So
it's not even just this could be like serious issues, and this is your home that you bought. You invested all of your money in. You killed my dog. I mean,
yeah. I mean, and this is an Austin 4-story. That's like twice the cost of a Houston 4-story.
I agree.
So,
what has been your perspective from the builder side? Are they willing to work with? What have you seen?
I am so delighted when they're willing to work with them. I find that the more privately owned the organization, typically the better result, because they're not that far apart. The decision maker is not that far apart from the studs being installed in the walls, right? They know the business entirely. And when you get to larger organizations, it can sometimes be difficult to convey this sense of urgency on one side and the stock price on the other, right? As long as the stock price is still going up, is that urgency as urgent? Is it now, if that urgency is affecting the stock price, then I guarantee we're going to get the attention we need. But it's still individual humans making these decisions. Some of them take it very personally. Some of them are very business-like. So it is the Wild West residential structures. But I would say we have open caseload right now of just under 300 projects or cases. I mean, some of them are very old because we still have pandemic stuff that's lingering. Gotcha. I have a 5-year-old arbitration to go to tomorrow. Gotcha. But that 5-year-old arbitration, 5 years ago, they would have fought tooth and nail. Now I think they're so ready to settle. Yeah. Because it's been not as the intensity of the situation has dissolved. Yeah. And they've looked at the numbers and they know what it's going to cost to go to trial, right? And that they're probably going to fulfill this arbitration, and hopefully some good comes from this. Time is our friend and our enemy, right?
Absolutely. And so people understand that when you go to an arbitration or litigation, in order to prove damages as a homeowner, the homeowner's got to bring an expert, somebody from the construction industry that can say, hey, these damages are reasonable and necessary. Absolutely has to be done. So we have to have experts. So let me ask you, so if somebody's buying a new house or older house, is there something that they can do before they buy it to make sure that it's not going to be an issue?
Sure. So we perform forensic real estate reviews, and we're more than happy to do that. But it's a couple $1,000s. It's not a $400 truck inspection. But this morning, I did a training of a really large Texas real estate inspector organization here in Houston, and I'm training them in pre-forensics. Okay. So traditionally, someone comes through and does a truck inspection. What do you get out of it?
That's what I'm saying.
Model. It's like nothing. It's not very reliable, and they're actually not going to see the things that make a big impact in the performance and the cost and the livability of the structure. So we're giving them and some other TREC inspection organizations the most common basic forensic knowledge so that if they could do a TREC inspection and they see these things, they can then go to the owner and say, hey, I actually think you do need a forensic review. Gotcha. And they can earn their way into it. So we're trying to, that's kind of like trying to turn a battleship to train every TREC inspector out there. But I just want to train the best ones. So if someone calls, I think
all these people have a false sense of security that my house is inspected. And all the time I had an inspector. I said, yeah. He's like, can I sue the inspector? I'm like, no. I mean, you really need to. The only other way to do it is hire you or have each system independently inspected. But then you still don't know if they work well together.
But if you call an HVAC guy to inspect your AC system, he wants to sell AC today. True. It's like if I go to the barber and ask him if I need a haircut, he always says yes, right? It's just the economics of the situation. Mm-hmm. So getting third-party reviews, if you actually want a third-party review of your AC system, it's going to cost $1,500. Yeah. They need to be able to make enough money that they don't feel compelled to sell you something while they're there. Gotcha. And that's going to start adding up a lot. And so it's good to start with what I would call an advanced TREC inspector, someone who understands that they're going to see things that are outside their parameters and at least give you the knowledge that you need to do something about it. It's the first step. Gotcha. Otherwise, we can go perform one. There's not a lot of people who do what we do. There's also some good resources out there with builders and architects that you could consult with. But, they're also going to have limited knowledge because they don't practice building forensics. They don't even carry the right kind of flashlight to identify a deficiency in texture changes and what that means. It's a whole bunch of techniques. There's a reason why people don't invite me to their houses for parties.
I'm sure. I'm sure that'd be pretty intense. Don't look around.
That's right.
So if you were going to design the perfect project, how would that outline go to make sure somebody doesn't end up in the back end like this?
Sure. And it's interesting because we haven't had this resource, and you were actually on this podcast, but the Your Project Shepherd podcast did a really good job of taking a subject couple through the process, and they made horrible decisions the entire time they were through that process. But there is a very proper process to follow. It's challenging for us here in Houston. And I know there's people outside of Houston that listen to your podcast, right? Worldwide, people listen to your podcast. But in Houston being one of the largest building markets in the United States, we're talking 80,000 houses a year, and less than 30% of those are required to have permits or inspections. Yes. So it's it's an extremely, extremely difficult climate. Mm-hmm. So if you don't elect to bring on the right kind of team and have the right kind of contracts in place, you're kind of screwed from the start. Yeah. And I would say the majority of homeowners are building or remodeling or modifying houses at best with hopes and dreams. And that's it. Yeah. But because our houses are so affordable here by national standards, even by state standards, we're the most affordable home. When there's a problem, they just throw the house away. Do you know how many times I do a forensic review? We have a Zoom call with the owners, and they realize they actually have situations, and they say, don't send me that letter. I don't want it. Because they believe they don't have to disclose that. Yeah, exactly. But that physical letter. I think that's up for debate, right?
Yeah.
But they will I could give you a list of houses never to buy that's 3,000 houses deep, right? Because there are significant performance issues and they choose just to bail. That's pretty much everything on Galveston Island. There's a reason why they buy the house in this winter and then they sell it next winter because it fills up with mold over the summer, and they sell it in the wintertime when the vapor when the mold's not live and people don't realize they bought a mold factory until next June. So kind of nuts.
That is crazy. I know. What do you think about, I'm just generally speaking, you said older built homes, like homes built in the 1950s, because there's still a lot here in Houston. Do you see a lot of those?
I do. Because I have a specialization in historic structures, I see the oldest of the old, but we also see, a 1950s house is still, an old structure. I mean, at this point, I consider any house over 15 years old one that has to be considered with antiquated or modified performance criteria. But I can say that the older the house, the more predictable it is. We have history with the house. I know how a 1960s ranch performs differently from a 1970s contemporary, right? Yeah. I know how a 1994 house will perform versus a 2004 because Energy Code or Energy Star became more rampantly introduced in 1995. And that's 95 forward. We have a little bit higher rate of failures until you modify houses pre-1995 with modern air conditioning, modern insulation, modern windows, and then it starts to compromise those older structures.
Gotcha.
What year house do you live in?
Well, 54.
54, and you've never invited me to your house.
No,
now I know. Okay.
Absolutely. Our first little tiny ranch house was a 56, and that thing we still own. We rent it out, but it's got like the original AC from like 1970, whatever. It's got the galvanized pipes and I know this is something we have to deal with, but I mean, it's been a lot less problems than I see new houses all the time in my office, and some of the I watch them because new townhomes around here on the west side of Houston, and they're crap. They're such
horrible. They're so good for my forensic business.
But literally, those things are going to melt in 10 years, and
they will. They're literally 4-story sticks of butter. So, but I would say on your 1954 house, please don't replace that AC system without talking to me first, right? Because there's going to be dynamics of that original AC system are actually encouraging you positive leakage with positive pressure, things like that, and it would be modified. But that's awesome. I can take an old house and make it outperform a new one in many, many cases.
Sure, because they're built a lot better. Yeah. So one last question I have for you, and I'm just kind of curious on your opinion on other states that require contractors to be licensed and Texas that doesn't. What do you think about that?
So when the pandemic hit, remember the beginning of the pandemic, and all of us as business owners were like, oh my gosh. I remember going from automatic payroll to saying only pay, like thinking that everything was going to melt down. And of course, being in the home industry, little did we know we would become absolutely energized, right? So I said, we're going to go ahead and take this opportunity to move into a regional mode. So we started pushing through the rest of the Gulf Coast, so Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And I remember thinking, okay, all of those states have a contractor's license. And they already respond to storm resiliency, wind code, things like that. I thought, okay, they're probably not going to need me that much. That is not true whatsoever. The license for the builder doesn't teach what I do. And the code doesn't cover what I do. And then we have the same rate of failure. I just don't have the density that Houston derives. Houston is the largest accumulation of those structures on the Gulf Coast. So we see more of it. Even by New Orleans standards, they actually accept a poor performance criteria as the norm. Oh, it's New Orleans, y'all. That's what it's just some moldy, y'all. Let's go have a drink. The same thing when I go to Miami, thinking, okay, I remember flying to Miami. I'm like, they've got to be having the same problems as us. Well, they're CMU block. Things are sweaty. People wear a lot less clothing. It's like just the expectation for performance is lower. Gotcha. The problem in Houston, the expectation for performance is high, but the dynamic for building is low. Yeah. So that we have that delta per expectation and reality. And I think that's what we're living through, right?
Looks like the perfect place for us.
Yeah, right. Perfect place for us. Like, why do we need to go anywhere else?
Scared as hell to build anything in this town.
No, we build some wonderful, wonderful structures here. We have such a great builder market, those that are super courteous. Architecture is not required until you get to 100,000 square feet. But there are some wonderful architects. But in all of Houston, and number 2 building market in the United States, there's less than actually 20 real residential architects, which is a crazy low amount. There's a lot of other means, and not just architects. There's some wonderful home designers too. But finding but on the other side of that is it's a very small town. It's very connected. it doesn't take very long to be referred to the right kind of people.
True. Very
Yep.
true. All right. So if people want to find out more about your services, where would they go?
Sure. Well, first off, I'm the only toner on the internet. I'm the easiest person ever to find. You'll get my blood type and social security number and everything. But we are Toner Home Matters. Company name is spelled all caps. My name is proper. You can Google, if you start typing up toner, once you get past the initial skincare, you will find me. I'm super easy to get hold of. You can just hit a contact now on our website, and you will be talking to me personally. All of our initial contacts, they go through me. I take all of them. I've already done 6 today to find out what the story is. And it's amazing. It's the same kind of story over and over and over again. The only difference is how we react to it. So we try to take our clients through that. And we have almost an equal 50-50 mix, homeowners and professionals, right? I love that we, even on the legal side, we serve both sides of the table because I don't really care. The reality is the reality of the situation. And a good expert is interchangeable. I'm not biased. I'm nobody's homeboy. It is what it is, right? And this is the reality. But we want to be conscious of not just the physicality, but the psychology, the economics of the situation, the culture of the situation, and it's all important to take into consideration.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, we're just here to try to solve a problem the most efficient way possible.
Yes, most definitely. Although we do have some bad actors we have to kind of work through every now and then. But otherwise,
I agree. Both on the legal side and on the contractor and on the
that's right. And homeowners, right? There's some not awesome people out there, but if you go in with a positive attitude and good intentions, normally the best situation arises.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Toner, for being on the show. I'm sure we'll have you on again.
Thank you very much. See you later. I look forward to your next podcast.
Absolutely. Hey guys, Karalynn Cromeens. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I've made a promise to never have paid ads in my podcast because I truly want it to be an educational series. But as part of that, then you're going to have to hear the things that I have to sell and then causes that are near and dear to my heart. I want to introduce you to a charity called Heroes for Children. They can be found at heroesforchildren.org. They are in the business of helping families with children who have cancer. And I think as a parent of healthy children, we take for granted the fact that our kids are healthy and we don't have to deal with a terminal illness or an illness that's going to change the way the family works. One parent's going to have to take off work and deal with being in the hospital all the time. So this charity is like immediate assistance, helping families with children who have cancer. So check it out, heroesforchildren.org. They're always having events at poker nights, easy ways to donate. So if you're getting anything at all out of this podcast, I ask that you give back in a way such as this. Go to heroesforchildren.org.